Both Chris Olave and Jordyn Tyson reaching 1,000-yard receiving seasons is a little bit more likely than you might think.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, and on today's episode, the Saints have some benchmark games coming up in their schedule that'll let us know just how good they really are. The Saints' Paris game against the Pittsburgh Steelers gives really good storylines, but also a massive break to the New Orleans Saints, where we're going to kick everything off looking at the wide receiver position and why both Jordyn Tyson and Chris Olave having 1,000-yard receiving seasons isn't as outlandish as you might expect. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe, so let's get into it. It's true. Jordyn Tyson and Chris Olave could both have 1,000-yard receiving seasons during the 2026 season, and it wouldn't be an outlandish situation for New Orleans at all. And it doesn't take a lot for us to look back into some NFL history to see pretty recently just how true that is. Now, if you're wondering, the last time that the New Orleans Saints had 2,000-yard receiving seasons, all you got to do is go all the way back to 2016. Yeah, 10 years ago. Can you believe that? 10 football seasons ago, the Saints had 2,000-yard receivers in one single season. Those receivers, of course, being Michael Thomas and Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks with 1,173 receiving yards and Michael Thomas with 1,137 receiving yards. Little simpatico there, a lot of fun. But that's the last time that the Saints have had 2,000-yard pass catchers, not just wide receivers or anything like that, but 1,000-yard pass catchers in the same single individual season. Now, you'll remember something else about the 2016 season, that it was one of Drew Brees' handful of times where he threw for over 5,000 yards during a single season. In that particular year, over 5,200 yards. And so now, of course, it's easy to go, well, there's no way that you can predict Jordyn Tyson and Chris Olave each getting over 1,000 receiving yards in a single season without also predicting that Tyler Shough throws for over 5,000 yards. But a couple of key differences, or really one key difference and another key observation point, kind of leads you another way. The key difference, of course, as you all have already said, probably before I'm even getting these words out of my mouth, is that the NFL has added a 17th game. And so that 17th game does give you a little bit of leniency and a little bit more opportunity to where maybe in a season where you might have an 1,100 or 1,200 yard receiver as well as a 900 yard receiver, that one extra game might get that 900 yard receiver to just over 1,000 yards during that same season, just getting that extra game. And that's certainly one piece of it. But the other piece of it is that it might not necessarily take the extra game, and you also don't actually have to have a quarterback throw for more than 5,000 passing yards in a season in order to be able to get that mark. Let's go to the 2021 season and look at the Baltimore Ravens, whose quarterbacks collectively threw for 3,960 plus yards, but that's it. They were not a team that reached even 4,000 passing yards that season, and they had 2,000-yard pass catchers. Tight end Mark Andrews caught for 1,361 yards, while Marquise Brown caught for 1,008 yards in that season. And like I mentioned, the collection of, I think it was 3 or 4 different passers that the Baltimore Ravens had during that season, or at least those that had passing attempts, didn't even reach as a team 4,000 passing yards. And so that goes to show you that now with a 17th game, you can indeed achieve that feat of 2,000-yard receivers without having the 5,000-yard passer. Now, the thing that made the Drew Brees season and the 2016 season so insane, of course, was that was one of those 3 years of really, really bad defenses that the Saints had, so they were in a lot of shootouts. But where that really shows up is here. The Saints had 2 receivers, 2 pass catchers, that caught 281 yards. Those were Travaris Cadet as well as Brandon Coleman. They had another receiver that went over 300 yards in Mark Ingram. They had another receiver in Colby Fleener that went over 600 yards with 631. And not only did they have 2,000-yard passers, and not just 1,000-yard passers, 1,100-yard passers, they also had an 895-yard receiver with Willie Snead, who I think now is a wide receiver coach for the Colorado Buffaloes or something like that, which is pretty cool. But not only did they have 2,000-yard receivers, they had 3 receivers of more than 750 receiving yards, 3 receivers of more than 850 receiving yards, and nearly 3 receivers of more than 900 receiving yards, only 5 yards shy of that. That is where the 5,000-yard passing season comes in. In the season, though, where Baltimore threw for less than 4,000 passing yards, they had a 1,300-yard receiver, a 1,000-yard receiver, and then also had a 500-yard receiver and another receiver over 394 yards. They had a 515-yard receiver in Rashad Bateman. They had a 394-yard receiver in Sammy Watkins. They had two 200-plus yard receivers in Devin Duvernay and James Prochet. By the way, every single person that we've named for that Baltimore Ravens season so far, a wide receiver, except for Mark Andrews, who sits at the top with the 1,361 receiving yards. And he had a 190-yard receiver with Devontae Freeman, the running back formerly of the Atlanta Falcons, of course, who was with the Baltimore Ravens during that season. So this was a team that did not throw for more than 5,000 passing yards, that did not throw for more than 4,000 passing yards, that had 6 receivers of more than 200 yards, had 4 receivers of more than 300 receiving yards, had 3 receivers of more than 500 receiving yards, and 2 receivers of over 1,000 receiving yards. So is it possible that Jordyn Tyson as well as Chris Olave could go over 1,000 receiving yards? Yes. Is it possible that Tyler Shough throws not for 3,960 yards, but for 4,200 yards, and then all of a sudden you have 2 receivers over 500 yards, or another receiver that's closer to 700 yards than 500 yards? All of that is absolutely possible without really having to kind of, bend reality here. Now, the biggest question mark is, can Jordyn Tyson and Chris Olave be on the field together enough to each eclipse that 1,000-yard mark? That will be up to the work of the Saints and their training staff and Ted Rath and those guys, and getting those guys out on the field and keep those guys out on the field. But if they do, and with the amount of their ability to be able to change up targets and matchups and things like that, there is a real possibility. And don't forget, Mark Andrews, over 1,300 yards. You take 300 yards, move those to somebody else, you still have 2,000-yard receivers there. And so getting these 2 receivers over 1,000 yards in a single season may not be as far-fetched as it might sound. All right, coming up next, the New Orleans Saints are headed to Paris in Week 7 to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Not only does that give you an intriguing set of storylines, but also cuts the New Orleans Saints a massive break. I'll tell you why as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. In a time where we can do anything on our phones, buying tickets should be no different and is no different thanks to our friends over at Game Time. With one of the easiest to use apps I've ever used and the easiest ticket buying app I've ever used, hands down, Game Time is your place to pick up affordable tickets for your favorite sporting events, comedy, theater, concerts, whatever it is that you're looking for. They're going to have you covered over at Game Time today. Once you download the Game Time app, all you got to do is swipe to the city that you're in, and you're going to get a whole list of upcoming events all across those categories that we talked about. The price you see is the price you pay. Love the transparency there, and you can even see a view from your seats before you buy the ticket. So take all the guesswork out of buying tickets by heading over to Game Time today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDON. That'll get you $20 off of your first purchase. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Square. I am a constant coffee shop customer, and I love that my local coffee shop uses Square. I feel a lot safer as a customer walking in, knowing that that's where I'm going to tap my card and I don't have to worry about any funny business and things like that. I love that. And of course, it just makes me feel like the company knows what it is that they're doing, because Square brings everything together all in one connected system, everything from payments to inventory to staff scheduling, as well as online orders. It's a lot to manage, but Square helps you put it all in one place. So if you're starting a business or you're running one that deserves better tools, Square is here to help you out. So right now you can get $200 off of Square hardware if you go to square.com/go/LockedOnNFL. That's SQARE.com/GO/LockedOnNFL. Run your business smarter with Square. Get started today. All right, family, the long-awaited Parisian announcement has finally been made. We now know the New Orleans Saints game date in Paris and their opponent, October 25th, week 7, 8:30 a.m. Central Time here in New Orleans. The Saints will host, and I'm going to use air quotes when I say host because they are not at home, but they are at their second home in Paris, France, hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that is a massive win for the New Orleans Saints. Let me tell you why. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen, being it every day. If you want these shows ad-free, interruption-free, head over to lockedonsaints.supercast.com or click the link in the description. You can learn more about how to get our shows ad-free each and every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. The initial assumption and reporting and rumors was that this Paris game that the Saints were going to host, or are going to host, was going to be on October 25th. That date turned out to be bingo, spot on, bullseye, all that. What changed was an expectation that it would be the Cleveland Browns that the Saints would face off with. Here's where the Saints got a massive break. That either changed, wasn't accurate, whatever, but the Saints still ended up with an AFC opponent. I think this cannot be overlooked. And this is something that we've seen some reporting on, Jeff Duncan and others, around how there were some NFC teams that were involved in the conversation as potential opponents in Paris. The thing about it is, and they're going gorillas. And the thing about it is that if the Saints would have hosted an NFC opponent in France, that's a little bit of a loss for New Orleans. We don't know what the crowd is going to look like in Paris. It's going to be packed, but it's going to be NFL fans from all around Europe who are going to be there. It's not going to be filled with, I think there will be a large Saints contingent and turnout, don't get me wrong. But I do think that there's a big difference between playing a key NFC matchup or worse, an NFC South divisional matchup. There's a big difference between playing that in the Superdome and playing that in Paris. And so with the Saints not getting the draw of Cleveland by the time it was all said and done, but still ending up with an AFC opponent, that is a massive stroke of luck, a massive win for New Orleans. Duncan reported that there was the Green Bay Packers were a possibility, right? And I get it. You're taking these games over to these different places abroad, different countries. The NFL finally not giving those international series games the kind of dregs games, right? You're not getting, the bad days of the Detroit Lions and the Jacksonville Jaguars facing off. You're getting in Australia, Rams and 49ers. You're getting divisional matchups like Jacksonville and Tennessee. You're getting these great matchups like New England and Detroit, right? And you're getting good, really, really strong matchup here with the Saints and now the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so you're giving a really, really good matchup there, and you're bringing a team that has kind of worldwide fan relevance together to play another team that has worldwide fan relevance in both the Saints and Steelers. And you could have done the same thing with the Saints and the Green Bay Packers. But thankfully, the NFL did not go that route because the Saints would much rather, I'm sure, host the Green Bay Packers in the Superdome than host the Green Bay Packers in France and in Paris. And that's just about having the dome field advantage and all those things. The Saints want that advantage back. They want that hometown, home crowd, feeling back in the Superdome, and having those kinds of games like big matchups, NFC, playoff potential impact matchups in the Superdome is a great way to get that. So I do think that this was a major, major win for New Orleans to not get the Cleveland Browns, but also not end up with an NFC or worse NFC South opponent in Paris, but still get a really good game here between the Saints and the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Saints right now lead the all-time series 9 wins to 8 wins over the Pittsburgh Steelers over the last 17 games that they've played. They lost the last matchup in Pittsburgh at Acrisure Stadium at a score of 20-10. That was a tough game. That was the orbital bone fracture game for Cam Jordan and all that. And so this is their first matchup since 2022, which of course ironically was also the last time that the Saints traveled abroad to play a game, where they played in 2022 in London. And so now you get this matchup, which I think brings some really intriguing storylines. If you get Aaron Rodgers back in Pittsburgh, you get a little bit of new guard versus old guard when it comes to the quarterbacks in this battle. You get Tyler Shough, the representation of the new generation of quarterbacks right now, going up against Aaron Rodgers, who's representative of like 6 generations. No, I'm just kidding. Who's representative of like the older guard that's going out, right? Like Drew Brees retired, Tom Brady retired, Aaron Rodgers is kind of the last bastion that's still a part of that, right? Ben Roethlisberger retired many, many years ago, all that. And so you get this kind of new versus old matchup at quarterback. And one of the other pieces that I really, really like to this matchup is the storyline of Mike McCarthy versus Kellen Moore. We already had a little bit of Mike McCarthy versus Kellen Moore for a short while when it was the Saints trying to figure out who their next head coach was. And Mike McCarthy was rumored to be a part of that coaching search. My understanding is actually otherwise, but Kellen Moore was, of course, the target for New Orleans, and he ends up getting that job. And so now you have those two guys who used to be head coach and offensive coordinator. Mike McCarthy, head coach, to Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator in Dallas. There was a whole bunch of conversation about, what was going to happen in Dallas and whether or not Kellen Moore was going to take over that head coaching role. But then when they made the decision to stick it out with Mike McCarthy, that's when Kellen Moore ended up going elsewhere, ended up in Los Angeles, then eventually a Super Bowl champion offensive coordinator with the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, of course, the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. And Mike McCarthy's been away from the game for a little while, but now returns, being able to take over things with the Pittsburgh Steelers and potentially reuniting with Aaron Rodgers over there. You also get a little bit of the revenge matchup between the Saints and Jari Evans. There's no real revenge there, but that's a fun piece to it as well. So there's going to be some good, really strong storylines around all of this that are going to be really kind of big for what this matchup represents as the first ever game played by the NFL in France in the totality of its history, and the Saints' 4th international series game since the international series launched in 2007, whenever that was. This will be the first international game for the Saints outside of London as well. So lots of great storylines here, but overall the Saints picking up a little bit of a win in terms of the opponent that they drew for this upcoming matchup in Paris. Coming up next, the Saints also will have some benchmark matchups in 2026. I want to highlight some of those, and I'll tell you who I think should lead off the season as the Saints' opening opponent week 1. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Rocket Money. I cannot tell you how helpful Rocket Money was for me when it came to filing my taxes because of all the work that I did with Rocket Money during the 2025 year, tracking all of my expenses, budgeting, right? Staying on top of the budgets, everything like that. They were massively helpful there. Even saving money on subscriptions that I'd forgotten about, all that. But just being able to sort out all of the spending, all of the income, all those other things had me very ready for tax season, even though I still waited until the very last minute to file my taxes. But I didn't have to, thanks to our friends over at Rocket Money. So if you want to go and check them out, they give you everything from setting up budgets, sending you alerts, make sure you're staying up to date on those budgets, keeping you up to date on upcoming bills and everything like that as well. So go and check them out. It's a personal finance app that will help you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions and stay on top of all of your financial goals. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster by going to rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints have a handful of benchmark games that will really let us know how much they've improved throughout the 2026 season. We appreciate you very much as always making us your first listen. Make sure you go and check out our good friend Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans. Should be getting some news about the Pelicans head coaching hire soon, we all imagine at least. And so you'll want to make sure you're keeping up with Jake over at Locked On Pelicans today, part of the #1 sports podcast network, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, you can find us during the 10 a.m. hour every day over on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network as well. The Saints have a few what I call benchmark matchups. These are the matchups that let you know kind of how much have they progressed, how good are they really, all of those things. And of course, they have their divisional matchups, very important to try to go 6-0 in the division, very important to try to be the best team in the division that you can be. But I also love the matchups that are here. I think Pittsburgh is one of those benchmark matchups, really tells you about where they rank the Saints do amongst some of the slightly above average teams in the NFL. I think Pittsburgh checks that box. I would say I would say Minnesota maybe checks that box, depending on if they're a little bit better this year. But I love that they have some opponents on their schedule this year that they lost to last year. Arizona, Chicago, right? And then obviously some of the games in the division. But I love that there are some of the more unfamiliar opponents that they lost to just a year ago, because you get the opportunity to welcome the Arizona Cardinals back to New Orleans, the team that you lost to last year. Can you beat them this year? You get to go on the road again to Chicago, a place and team where and to whom you lost last year. Can you go there and beat them this year? I think that that's a really good gauge for improvement, a measure of improvement for New Orleans as they go from 2025 to 2026. Now, it's clear that the roster has improved, but how long will it take for those improvements to also hit the field? And so if you were to get the Arizona Cardinals within the first 5 games of the season, for instance, that's a really good measure considering you opened the season against them last year. If you get Chicago sometime after that week 6 game and you got to go there and play a little bit of a cold weather situation, that gives you a little bit of a measure of the team that you are and can be. The Saints have 3-4 actually potential outdoor cold weather games in 2026. Chicago, Baltimore, Cincinnati, and New York. And so if you can go to any of those places in the cold weather and win those matchups, that's a benchmark. If you can go and beat the Baltimore Ravens in their stadium, that is a massive indication of how far along you've come. If you can welcome the Green Bay Packers to your stadium and beat them, that is a massive indication of how far you have developed and how far you've come. Now, the Detroit Lions on the road could be one of those games too. Got to figure out exactly who the Detroit Lions are. They're a team just like the New Orleans Saints that faces a quote-unquote easy schedule. Remember, we don't really buy strength of schedule on this show. But you get an opportunity to show that you can go out there and beat a team that has a similar trajectory to you on the road. Or you face these teams that you lost to last year and show that you've improved. Or you face legitimately good playoff contention type teams. Baltimore, Green Bay, Detroit potentially, and the Steelers. This is a really good schedule for New Orleans, not just because it has some friendly matchups within your division, but you also have some friendly matchups like, we'll see what happens with who is Minnesota at that time, Arizona, Cleveland, Cincinnati, New York. Those are all friendly matchups for you. So you have 6 at home. You have 6 in division matchups that you would consider winnable. You would consider Minnesota potentially winnable, Arizona, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and New York all potentially winnable. If you can win the most of the games in your division, you're already knocking on the door of a 9-win season there. If you can get to that point, the Raiders also, right? They're in there as well. So you're looking and you're knocking on the door of a 9-10 win season just with those games, but also some real opportunities to prove your value as a contender against other contenders. Chicago, Pittsburgh, Green Bay, Baltimore, and then potentially Detroit. And so for New Orleans, this is a really, really nice schedule for them because they could struggle against the better teams, beat the worst teams, and still be in conversation within their division. Or you could beat the worst teams and then go out there and hang with some of the better teams that are on your schedule. And you've proven the strides that you've already made. I think the Saints are in the middle of their, I don't want to call it a rebuild anymore because now they've kind of added all the weapons, right? There's not as much turnover left to be made going into next offseason. But maybe that's a finishing touches offseason, right? That's a big time trade up, go and get and target a player that you want in the draft, go and get that player and then let the rest of the draft come to you. Maybe there's a free agent to go out there and spend on. The Saints have over $50 million available for them right now going into 2027. But before they get to all that, this season in 2026, good barometer for where they might be. The game that I think should open up the season is at home against the Cleveland Browns. The game that was initially going to be the game in Paris, I would love to see, and ideally for the NFL, I think they would love to see, Tyler Shough versus Shedeur Sanders to start the season off. I think that'd be a big time draw. I think there's a real opportunity for you there to be able to bring in a raucous audience that's going to want their quarterback to show that they're better than the quarterback that everybody thought that the Saints should go after, all that. I think that would be an excellent way to open up the season, bring some juice in, and charge up the Superdome as you get ready for what should be, looking at these opponents, understanding where things are headed, a really exciting 2026 season for New Orleans. All right, family, time for a little bit of lanyap for the real ones that made it to this point into the episode. The other thing I would love to see out of tonight's schedule release is the New Orleans Saints getting a home game against the Atlanta Falcons that coincides with what's going to be the 20th anniversary of the Dome coming. Can you believe that? 20 years ago, September 25th of 2006, the New Orleans Saints held their Domecoming game. And for those that don't know the Domecoming game, that was the game when the Saints returned to the Superdome for the first time following Hurricane Katrina. They had played at Tiger Stadium. They had gone to San Antonio. They had played on the road, of course, all that. And that game up against the Atlanta Falcons, a really good Atlanta Falcons team at that time. They had Warwick Dunn. They had was it Algie Crumpler? I can't remember if he was still on the team at that time. But they had Michael Vick. They had all this stuff. And the Saints went out there and, belt to bottom. And of course, the rebirth, the block punt by Steve Gleason, recovered in the end zone, all those things, all the stuff that we look back at and kind of makes you a little teary-eyed watching it. And all Mike Tirico touchdown, New Orleans, silence. Let the Dome do its thing. Just awesome, really incredible moment. And the 20th anniversary is upcoming. Now, the 20th anniversary proper, September 25th, 2026, is on a Friday. So now you could do a Thursday night game, September 24th, 2006. For that, I think the Saints would love to have the Thursday night game before their Week 7 travel to Paris. But you could do that. But I think that having either, dare I say, the Monday night game on the 28th of September would be super cool, or even just having a game in the Superdome against the Atlanta Falcons on the 27th, that Sunday, would be good. I think that day deserves to be commemorated, and if the NFL is worth its salt at all, they will make sure that the Saints and Falcons play their first game of the season, coinciding with that Dome-coming weekend. At least I think that should be the case, or at least the Saints should be at home and playing in the Dome that weekend, if nothing else. But I'd love for that to be the Saints-Falcons home game early on in the season. All right, family, coming up tonight, live record prediction following the release of the schedule. And coming up tomorrow, we'll break down that schedule more in detail. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me in the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.